Okay, this is Mario Martinez, and I am including here an article a paper that will get us thinking about logical reasoning and the dissertation process. So chapters 1, 2, and 3 are all based on logical reasoning, and then chapters 4 and 5 are the same thing, but we're running into a different form of presentation. So, and some of you are not going to do traditional dissertations in that traditional format, but the idea is the same. Everything that we write should draw towards a logical conclusion, be it in the literature review, in the methodology section, or be in the introduction. So, and if you're not doing that, then you might want to rethink how you're writing, because eventually it will catch up with you and you will have a lot of revisions. So, one of the surefire ways to make sure that you're doing this adequately is to rely on a few steps in logic. So this is a paper that I just submitted to the University of Northampton a few days ago, not very long ago, and it gives you some strong usage of logical argumentation, and it also gives you some weak points. It was supposed to be a very short paper. I count 3 pages, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 2.5, 3 pages. And that's not a lot of space to argue a sophisticated argument. So what I did is I put my sub-arguments into a table. And some of you may find this useful as you're doing different various forms of writing. But we were limited to 1,000 words, and that's basically what this all comes out to. And so I had to make an argument. Now, let's talk about making the argument. A lot of times people get very overwhelmed with writing their dissertations because they're incorporating various different kinds of skills and thinking and researching into what they're doing, and they forget that you have to make the arguments. Okay, that's why we have a defense. Defense is a chance for you to, once you've written the dissertation, you're able to defend the arguments that you're making, and hopefully you're not called out on the carpet in front of your audience and your dissertation committee for making unsound arguments. That's basically what this comes down to, is a chance to showcase what you've done and to get holes poked through your logical reasoning if they're not there. But we want to avoid that by writing well in the first place. So what I give you, it's basically maybe we could even call it a 5-paragraph essay. I'm sure it's somewhere near there. Basically, I get into the thesis, okay, and so what I argue is that Milgram's work is performed for lasting fame and attention over to the work over against plausible research possibilities. So I'm nailing him right here, and I'm creating a theory as to why his famous study on obedience was written. Okay, and so that's my thesis. What I've done is I'm going to tell people I'm arguing this, and that's what I'm doing. So I start off with the first point. Okay, the main research questions are affected by several influences, but he chose this particular way to examine the problem of authority. All right, so that's my first point in that paragraph. Okay, then I have the second sentence, which feeds back into the thesis, right? He followed a research design that is in keeping with the historical time period, and from there I argue my point. In the next piece, right, the next point that I make, it also points back to the thesis. It can be observed that Milgram's work detailed most specificity in his procedure section, which would be a linchpin in the study of the study's fame. All right, and then finally, this also points back to my original thesis. The methodological variation would meant that he could have attacked propositions from various vantage points. All right, and then I give you a conclusion paragraph. All right, so these are points. This is basic essay writing, right? I make the points and then I have to support them somehow, but I'm also making an argument. So all the points should be argued and pointed back to the thesis, right? Let's look at the first paragraph, okay? What I'm doing here is I'm making that initial case. I'm saying that he's affected by several influences, but he chose a spectacular way to examine the problem of authority. What I did is I went ahead and made sub-arguments, and this is because of the compactness of this writing. But the sub-arguments actually point to this piece here, okay? So let's go into the arguments. We have table 1, argument 4, 1, 2, 4, and 3, okay? Let's go there. So we're going to go to the very end of things. And what I've done is I've done a classical way of identifying the argument type. I labeled it with a number, and then I gave the format. Then I put in little footnotes to make sure that I understood and my reader understood what I was arguing, okay? This is really important when you're going through, it helps to identify the disjunctive syllogisms, the dilemma, all of the other pieces that you're arguing, um, and then give them some fleshing out. So let's go through 1 through 4. I start with the disjunctive syllogism, okay? And that is 1, A or B. It's not A, therefore it's B. So number 1, I say the protocol in Milgram's study highlights actual obedience in a benign way. He could have done it that way. That's one side. B is the protocol that highlights stress, internal ambivalence, and spectacle. So he had a choice is what I'm arguing. He could have chose a benign way, or he could have chose one that highlights stress. And then we identify it as not being A, therefore it's B. That's the beginning of the case that I'm making, okay? Then in number 2, I make another point. In number 2, I pose a dilemma. You know, in the benign versus the spectacle, we have different outcomes. If he chooses this route, then he gets C. If he chooses this route, he gets D. So let's look at what those are. 3. If you perform a benign study, A, then, oops, C. If you perform a benign study, the study would not have a strong social effect. It would not take a prominent role in history. Why? Because nobody really remembers those things. But B, if you perform a spectacular study, then the reasoning is that the study would have a strong social effect and it would take that prominent role in history, okay? This is really, really basic, but it's what builds arguments, okay? Then I'm going to put, I use what's called modus tollens, which is the method of taking. So I say you either have this or you have that. If not, it's not A, it's not that, or it's not this, therefore it's that. Okay, so let's look at it. Modus tollens. So I argue that he could have continued Arendt's ideas as cited in his literature review, which are more benign threads of looking at authority, okay? And then the B is he could have directly falsified her idea that persuasion through argumentation is not useful in coercion, okay? Oh, modus tollens, sorry about that. It's not A, therefore not B. So if he chose, what I'm arguing is that if Milgram chose Arendt's approach in his literature review and directly falsifying the idea that persuasion through argumentation is not useful in coercion, he could have also made a case about coercion and authority, but he doesn't do that. He doesn't cite Arendt, and therefore he doesn't use this this round of reasoning in coercion. So it's not A, therefore it's not B. This is important because I established the point that it would have been internally sound given his literature review if he attacked the problem from that way. But then once he doesn't do it that way, he does it another way, and that way is through spectacle. So I'm going in micro steps here, and that becomes really, really important when you're trying to make the case. A lot of times we think really, really fast. Some people are slow thinkers, but a lot of people get hung up and thinking very, very fast, and then they forget to slow down. And that's what all this is, basically, building it inch by inch, the argument, the case that you're making. Then I use, for number 4, modus ponens or ponens. If A, then B. A, therefore B. So this is the method of putting. Okay. Let's look at it. Number 9. If A, then B. Okay, if you reference the Holocaust that had happened approximately 20 years previous to the study, readers would link his work with spectacle and emotions affiliated with the Holocaust, even though this study was in keeping with the Nuremberg Code. Okay, and then he did that. Okay, Milgram did this. 9, A, therefore B, right? 9 and 10. He referenced that Holocaust. Therefore, the readers would have no other choice but to recall those emotions and ideas affiliated with the Holocaust. Okay, let's go back to the first paragraph that I've written besides, we're going to the first paragraph here in the argument. So, right here, what I've already done is I've established my first point. I've done it through very basic reasoning, okay? I show that I give the research questions, but then I talk about how he cited the Holocaust in his introduction. That's argument 4. That's the last argument we looked at, right? And that was the modus ponens, or ponens. I'm not really good with Latin, so it could be one of those two pronunciations. Argument 4 in Table 1, right? We talk about the consequences of citing the Holocaust in the introduction. And so then we discuss whether the study design should have been benign, right, or creating inner conflict. Okay. And then I forward the idea that he could have chosen an experimental situation that was less intrusive. And instead, he created one with spectacle and discomfort. And so then I reference those other arguments. By doing that, I've made my point. I've convinced my reader that this point is really well worth it. So I want you to go through and look at the other points here and see if you can find out the other sub-arguments that are being made. Okay, thanks, bye.